Welcome to Nerds at Church, a podcast about nerdery and the Bible. I'm Pastor Emily, and I use pronouns like they, them, theirs.
And I'm Pastor Kay, and my pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Beth, and my pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Pastor Dale, and my pronouns are he, him.
In this episode, we'll discuss the 11th Sunday after Pentecost, also known as Proper 16 or Lectionary 21, which this year falls on August 12th.
Check out the episode description for links to the Bible passages and other references we make in this episode.
So our guests for today are the founders and owners of Pause for Humanity, Beth Bolenbach and Pastor Dale Welling. Beth has been a social worker for over 30 years, working in hospice, HIV care, and private practice in life transition, grief counseling, and anxiety stress management. And she is now wanting to turn her attention to how working with and for animals with people can help us all connect, heal, and be present in ways harder to come by in traditional models of healthcare. Dale has been a pastor, has trained and worked with horses using a natural horsemanship approach, and most recently has worked in hospice as a spiritual coordinator and community liaison, helping to educate and partner people and families through life transitions. He's now turning his experience toward equine-assisted learning and animal support therapies to not only support people through transitional times, but to help people stay focused on the possibilities in their life still, not the obstacles that simply get in the way.
Welcome!
We are so glad to have you both with us.
We're happy to be here.
Yes, we are. This is thrilling for us.
Can you tell us a little bit about Pause for Humanity? I hadn't heard of it until Kay mentioned that you all are co-founders.
Awesome. Can I go first?
Sure.
Okay. So Pause for Humanity is an animal sanctuary, and we work with the animals that live here to see how they want to socialize and how they want to interact with people. And then we can partner with them to work with people either in equine-assisted learning, to help kids with character development stuff, to do some therapeutic interventions. And we also are doing some community events at this point as well. And our dog, Hazel, is also a therapy dog that Dale takes sometimes to the nursing homes with him as he works. Our main mission and tagline is people helping animals, helping people. So it kind of creates that circle of life and care.
Wonderful. So I know everyone is going to be curious because I know our fans. So if you could give us a little information of what types of animals do you have at Pause for Humanity?
Well, we have alpacas we're here from the get-go. A lot of people don't think of them as therapy animals, but they really help people learn about patience, staying calm, and social skills that really help people plug in. Then we also have goats, and they also are wonderful because they show us how to check out the environment before walking into something. And then we have horses and miniature donkeys that are a lot of fun, and they can be used in so many different ways, from leadership skills to just learning to ground yourself, so many different things.
What size is a miniature donkey?
Perfect.
Okay, reasonable answer, but also.
So, good question. The horses are normally 45 inches from the withers. The withers is the base of the neck. It's a slight hump that comes up off the back. So that's what's measured from that to the ground. So from 45 down to, I believe it's 34. It depends on which people you talk to. 34 and below, I believe it's considered a miniature. So from the base of the neck down.
Yeah. So about mid-thigh for me is when they lean into me where they hit.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Sure.
We have a lot of fun. It's amazing when people come out just doing a general exercise, common knowledge as we call it, introducing them to natural horsemanship or animal respect.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing the connections they make. So that I don't think you could find anywhere else. We basically work with emotion. A lot of places that have horses and stuff do physical riding things where we are just for emotion purposes, helping people get through things.
We have more animals to introduce, though.
Oh,
so we have the horses and the donkeys and the alpacas. And then we also have a feral cat that we took in that ended up giving us 7 litters of kittens because she escaped before we could get her fixed. And she finally sat down before she gave birth the last time and let me close the door to the crate. So Mama is still with us, and we have about 8 of her kittens. We're going to adopt one out tomorrow, but there are no more litters of kittens now unless we choose to foster. We also also have 6 ducks that we brought in as rescues, because sometimes people, if they can have chickens, they think they can have ducks, but zoning ordinances are different. And so ducks make a lot more noise, roosters make a lot more noise. So people get them and then realize they can't keep them. So we've taken some of those in, both of chickens and of ducks. And as of today, we are now home to 3 Great Pyrenees sisters who had probably been dumped when they were quite young and had been on the loose for months. And they are a little over a year old now, and a wonderful family was able to coax them into their home yard. They don't like being inside, and has cared for them over the last 3 weeks and has been trying to find a home for them. So we reached out because they want to keep them all together. They survived by being together. And many people contacted them saying, I'll take one. And a farm had said, I can't handle more than 2. And we said, we're a sanctuary, we'll bring them home. And so they just came over today. And it's
wonderful. I'm so glad they worked out.
Fun day. Yeah, it's been such a fun day to be outside with them. And I am staying up late and he's getting up early because we're just going to have to check on them for a little while, because they do have collars on them. They will come when approached now, but they have never had any training. They have never been on leash. They've never had a home. And so we want to, especially these first few days, we're going to keep our eyes on them quite extensive. So we're incredibly excited about that.
Right.
And I'm sure Hazel, the therapy dog, was also very excited to meet them.
Yes.
As well as Hazel's friend.
Clarence.
Yeah.
Yes, Clarence is a 2-year-old puppy who weighs 100 pounds. So he was all blah, so excited to see everybody. So they had a lovely play date this afternoon. Yep.
Wonderful.
That's fantastic. So is that all of the animals?
I think so. I don't think we missed anybody now. Yeah.
The chicken. Did you say?
I said the chickens and the ducks.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. We've got big chickens and little chickens too.
So,
okay.
So what's fascinating is when people come out to visit, who they identify with. And because some people, even though I love horses, some people get a little bit scared. So a goat is perfect. So we've had kids reading to ducks. You just never know. So we allow the people to go to who they identify with. And then that's when the magic starts.
That's awesome. Do you have favorite animals? Or if that's too hard, because I know that it's very hard for some, favorite things you have discovered about animals while they've been at the sanctuary?
Well, you know I do, so I'll let you go first.
My favorite story, Beth and I were working together, and I know you asked about the favorite animal, but that's too hard. I'm like a parent. They're all my favorite. So
I thought it might be too hard.
Whoever's
so
behaving I can work with that day is my favorite. So there we go.
Sure.
But we have an alpaca by the name of Tamara, and everyone thinks I'm probably the smartest trainer in the world, but there's nothing I did, okay? And we had a group of Cub Scouts, and she's done this a handful of times. There was a young boy, 9 years old at the time, very scared to talk, went to counseling for several years, and he came up, and Tamara, now alpacas are normally very timid animals, so they normally very skittish, but in this type, there was a group of kids. Tamara came up to this one young man that was very bashful and shy, came up, kiss on the cheek.
Oh.
Okay. He turns around and looks up at me, plain as day. I did not know the background, He said, "What was that?" And I said, and the mom was just surprised. She ran and got the father and came back. But while she was gone, I explained to him that was an alpaca kiss. That was her way of telling you that she loves you. When the mom came back, when the father came back, again, they were completely surprised. He turned around without cue, without coaxing, turned around and told his parents, "I love you." From what they shared, that was the first time he's ever said, "I love you" to either of them, 9 years old.
Wow.
So, those are the miracles that happen when you work with animals. So
yeah,
that's my favorite story.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Yeah, we've had favorite moments probably with each of the animals. And as another animal comes in that maybe I didn't know as well, I fall in love with each of them as I get a better sense of them, holistically. And there's definitely, I knew I wanted goats, but now really understanding them and knowing them, they're also, they're individuals too, within that. And I have to say recently that the donkeys, I'm surprised. I mean, I knew I'd like them, but I am surprised at how donkeys. The 3 of them just travel together like a big orb. And when they come up, they will make a triangle around you. and lean into you. And if one of them realizes another one is getting more attention, she'll just move and cut the other one off. All of this happens without them ever making eye contact with you, because again, they don't even come up to your waist. And the coolest thing about the donkeys that I've realized is they don't ever break their posture. The way they stand with their head, the way it sits on the neck, they don't ever look up at us. They don't ever look down at the ground unless they're eating. They just hold their form, and yet they know everything that's going on, and they read people, and their energy is just so calm and so kind. Unless they get really bugged, and then they might kick the horse a little bit because he gets in their way. But other than that, they are this, just you just when you're with them, it's just, this is a being, and they're just 200% there, and it's just it's impressive to me. It's there's a lot of honor, there's a lot of respect they have for themselves that I would have never known. Like from the, I like donkey cartoons, and you just don't know. But they're amazing animals. So
Right.
they are my latest smitten animal.
We have a lot of fun as you get to know.
Yeah.
Because every time we work with animals and then bring people in that's never been here before, it's a great memory, and people learn things. We had a bunch of college students that were really intimidated to get up and speak. So I shared with them, why don't you speak in front of Pepe? Because he doesn't know what you're saying. So if you pronunciate something wrong, if you mess up on the meaning or language somehow, he doesn't care. All he wants to know is, are you going to be animated enough to where you're going to hold his attention, which is the key to public speaking. If you get there monotone, you're going to not get the side that is favorable for most people. You're going to get the tail. But he's going to be there all the time. So he shows up, and it was
a horse with very excellent taste.
So yeah.
So Paws for Humanity is a goal that the two of you spent a lot of years working towards. So what is it really about, like, when you started, before you knew all this? What was it about the relationship between animals and people that drew you so strongly and for so long to this work?
Ooh. Can I go first?
Yeah.
For me, I grew up with dyslexia and different handicap, reading handicap, but they didn't know what it was.
Sure.
I was like the shy boy. Younger. The only way my mom recognized me if I was in a store is by my laughter. So that was how she could find me. So animals has always been a big part of my life, because in many ways I felt like they understood me. When I went through my divorce, I used the animals to help work with my kids, and we were able to bond a lot more because we were able to be truthful around the animals. So that developed a lot of the ideas that I had for Paws. And it was kind of funny, not to share, but when we first went on a date, our first date, I explained to her the dream I had, and ironically, she had a similar dream. So it just, yeah.
Yeah, it was the end of the evening, and we talked about everything. We were in our 40s when we met, and he said, I have something I have to tell you. I'm like, okay, what could this be? And that his whole life he had worked to take care of his family and for others, and his focus was on that. And he needed to do this thing for himself, this thing for me. Like, this is my time. And then he described this world of working with horses, with kids, whether it was with behavioral disorders or with emotional concerns, to help them learn confidence. I'm like, okay, that's not really a super selfish thing you're talking about,
No.
But he said, this is going to happen. This is my future. And I said, well, that's great, because what drew me to this is I spent most of my career in Chicago, and I went from healthcare, which had less and less time in its efficiency for mental health care services, for support services, for facilitation, even to help people cope and adapt, during a visit. So doing wellness approaches, doing workshops, and then moving into private practice where I could spend time with people and helping with the adjustment to illnesses, or facilitating and just companioning people that were grieving or going through larger changes like that. Really, I loved it. But at the end of the hour, when people had to go back outside and get on a train and be downtown with 2 million other people, you're not going to crack yourself open super wide and close up well. If you have to go back to work later, or if you have to be bombarded with all of that in the environment. So I very early on learned that I needed space outside my office where people could sit and collect and be. And then the whole consciousness thing of what happens when we are just present and don't go from thing to thing so fast. And so
Mhm.
I realized I wanted either a retreat center or somewhere that was out in nature where we could do some of this kind of healing and kind of reflective work without having to just get up and run away right afterwards. And so I knew I wanted to retire into doing that. So when he shared his story, and I had a little place up here, and he was living in South Bend, and I was starting to look, and I figured this is where it would have to be because there's Lake Michigan, there are orchards, there are woods, there are farmland fields, there's every kind of nature you could want here. And so I knew that's where my focus was going to be. So when he said what he wanted, I said, that actually kind of fits with what I'm expecting to move towards. And he was like, no, I'm serious. Like he thought I
It was the first date. Come on, you know.
And so we kept dating and we kept talking about this and we realized we actually want the same thing and the two ideas support each other. Like the animal work wouldn't be as good if you didn't have the variety of nature around us, and the nature, you know, without the people in it would not be nearly as fulfilling. So it's been important to both of us for a long time.
I really like that both of you lied, right? Like Dale, you're like, I have this dream of like this really selfish thing that I want to do that's not actually selfish at all. And Beth, you're like, I want to retire and stop working.
You so nailed us. Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
And we still say things that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's lovely. The only person we're lying to is ourselves.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
But it's kind of awesome because, you know, I was a pastor. I grew 3 churches. It was neat. That's almost unheard of anymore. But it's kind of funny because, especially reading the passages today that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes, it's amazing. Either you're going to do it 100% or you're not, you know? And that's one of the things I brought out when I developed a ministry, not just with the churches, but with individuals. Either you look at all the possibilities and forget about the distractions, or you don't.
Yeah.
So that's where your heart's going to be. So anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've talked about some of the highlights, but are there other highlights that are particularly endearing or funny or, I don't know, whatever adjective you frustrating, whatever adjective you like, when working with like non-human therapy animals and humans together?
Oh my gosh. Working in hospice as a spiritual coordinator as well as a bereavement coordinator, I really try to follow God's path. I think God allows us to drive the bus, figuratively speaking, in our own lives. So it's up to us. So I do the same thing when I work with people, that you'd be amazed how many times people come up and share things with you, and or they don't feel comfortable. You bring a therapy animal in and it's like they unleash everything. They had all this bottled up emotion, and because they had a dog maybe when they were 5, and now right before they pass, they have a privilege of being with the dog again, and it just unleashes all these emotions that they were afraid to share otherwise. And I've been witness to probably about 3 or 4 people that when it was their time to go, we had an animal there. They loved on it. They found their peace, and then they were taken. And it was such a beautiful moment. A lot of people would cry, but I think that's what we're here for. We're here to serve each other. So anyway, those are my favorite moments.
Yeah, I think 2 things. One is we make it very clear to people that we are an animal sanctuary, that this is their home, and that we are the stewards to them. And so when you come, we are not a petting zoo, and you don't get to just run up to any animal, no matter where it is, and expect it to welcome that, and that we have to move slowly and step forward and sometimes stand still and let them come to you. And as Dale said, sometimes that can help teach patience. But to me, it is teaching awareness. It's teaching respect. It's teaching consciousness, conscious engagement. And the same people that sometimes have a hard time doing that to others are also incredibly offended when it happens to them. So it's a lovely mirror, and it's a lovely way to kind of just say, isn't that interesting? Because you just said how much you hate when somebody's in your face. They're like, you watch this. And it's universalizing. And sometimes it clicks differently, you know? And some of those moments are beautiful. Also, when we can point out, hey, you're saying this is a struggle of yours, it's a similar trait to how they are, and here's how it works for the animal, and here's where it's hard for them too. So it can model and just show that there's nothing wrong with you because you have a certain sensitivity or you have a certain personality style or trait.
Sure.
That there's room for everybody, and there's going to be somebody who is not going to engage with the horse that's in your face or the goats that are running, and they're going to find that one alpaca in the corner and say, what's her story? And that tells you so much information, like how cool that you noticed that one in the corner. So those are the moments that touch me, and that when the animal is recognized in a respectful way, it's beautiful. And so I can't say that it's just one story of that. We get to witness that every week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so many times, parents bring their kids because their kids are kind of off in their own world and stuff. They're trying to reconnect. And last year we had parents bring two young ladies, and obviously they didn't want to be there. As soon as they were doing the introductions and stuff, the one of the young ladies turned around and said, "What makes this place so special?"
Mm-hmm.
And I turned around and I said, "I don't know. Let's go do a tour and we'll find out."
Yeah.
So we did. We did the tour. It was just a normal tour and everything. And I think we spent like 45 minutes. It was slightly longer. A tour is like 30 minutes on average.
Sure.
But this time, the young ladies were going through things. And so they got a few extra minutes. And when it was all done, I asked her, I said, what do you think about everything? And she goes, "Wow, I really have a sense of belonging." I said, "Well, there you go." I said, think of that. Think of how many places you go to during the day that you just want to fit in. Compare that to the numbers where you feel like you belong. That's what makes it special. And that's it. So anyway, that was my favorite story. So,
yeah,
I know.
That's my best friend has a 4-year-old, and she loves animals, and also if they're not presented in the right way, then she's terrified of them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And so when I was still in Iowa, there were a couple times where we went a couple different places. She loved the petting, like the goat petting part at the zoo.
Mm-hmm.
We went apple picking, and they had some chickens, and they had some goats, and they had some pigs. And she was just like scared of the chickens because she came across the chickens before we had a chance to like frame the chickens for her, like frame who they were.
Sure.
So then she's like very, very hesitant around the chickens, and then the pigs are there, and I saw her notice the pigs, and I was like, look at those pigs like laying down, sleeping. They're so funny. Once you say that an animal is funny to her, done. It's like, it's great.
Yeah.
But we also one time went to like a knitting place that had alpacas, and there were like so many alpacas, and you could like feed them, but there were so many people there that like the alpacas were not hungry anymore. And so she's just like wandering around, and there's all these kids and stuff, and then like finally like she gets to like one that's just like sitting down kind of minding its own business, and she just like went over and like felt the like fur and was like, what is this? Like, this is weird. But yeah, so I can see how like having all of the different animals is a helpful thing for folks, but also like that space to like just have a family come who's having a hard time and have that space to just look around and see what's there.
And I love what you just described too from the petting zoo end, because we can really get into kind of the hierarchy of what behavior we value and how we train each other and train animals. And doesn't that mean we're using them in a way that they don't have a choice and they can be exploited? And yet we love the petting zoo, and we love to be able to run up to them, and they get fed all day, and sometimes they're not hungry anymore. And, we have the opposite experience here, that the alpacas that were here, we found the home because we were looking for property, and people that had an alpaca farm that wanted to retire did not feel comfortable selling or giving their alpacas to a sanctuary because they couldn't find a sanctuary that wouldn't split them up again if other people wanted to rehome them. And these animals are herd animals. They are at the bottom of the food chain in the mountains. So they are very family cliquey oriented. And she didn't want them split up, so she thought she was going to have to stay here until they all passed. But in the meantime, she also didn't show them. She bred them for a little while and stopped. They were not handled a lot. They weren't socialized to people. And so they let us come over, and they taught us how to care for the animals before we even bought the place. And because they were our first sanctuary group. And neither one of us knew alpacas, but it took a while for them to even like not move when we walked past them. That's how skittish they were with people.
Sure.
And so when you really think about what are animals that are undomesticated, it takes a very different approach to befriend someone who hasn't been taught to act a certain way around a person. And if
Sure.
you want to go to the larger stuff of what we can teach, whether it's equality and equity, and whether it's othering and hierarchy and all the layers of exploitation that we don't think about it because we've been socialized to it. There's a lot that we can do with this in a way that hopefully will not be as defensive making if we're not just talking about us and another person. So my wheels always turn to how can I plant a seed for this message that's about heart, and that's about, again, I will always go back to regard. It's just about having regard as equality with the people. And I always call them the people, the alpacas, the animals that work. So I'm hoping that that's another part of our future, because it's necessary at the individual level at this point. I think we just, any way we can have those conversations in a loving way.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we invited Beth and Dale to be with us today because our readings today focus on Sabbath rest. And as I'm sure our listeners can already tell, a lot of their work is all wrapped up in that. And so I suppose my next question is, do animals need Sabbath too? And do they take it on their own, or do you have to sort of encourage them into it?
Yeah.
I love this question.
Me too.
I think with my experiences, they're smarter about taking the Sabbath than we are. They're done.
Yeah.
They're done. And when they need to recharge, they're not afraid to share their opinions. If Peppy doesn't get enough attention, he whines, and like horses do, or the goats will play. They'll, but yeah, I think they really do. They also have to have downtime. We've had people come and it's like, nope, not today, and they go off to the far pasture, and that's fine,
Sure.
So that, I think they're actually smarter at it than we are.
Yeah, I would say the same thing.
And there's enough of them that, if it's a not today for one or all of the alpacas, there are other animals that maybe are like, yeah, I'm ready today.
Right. They want to engage. Exactly. And that's why we want to do some of the training with different kinds of animals, so that they can step in and out. They can tag out when they want to, I will say that what I've learned actually from taking care of very small kittens and getting them socialized, that sometimes it's whether it's a very young animal or sometimes even the goats, they can get overexcited and you have to help them take a time out because they don't want to miss the party.
Sure.
They don't want to miss out on anything. And
Not dissimilar to 4-year-olds, actually, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And with the kittens, sometimes you just don't think how long a day is for them. 15 minutes, give them a break. And so I think it's something that they learn, and if they are left, in their own species, they teach each other. That's the herd again. That's the community.
Sure.
But when we take them and isolate them and only have one, they don't get the right cues to take their breaks and to take their naps. And I think that's how they grow up, learning how to rest and how to take Sabbath and how to, kind of respect that downtime as necessary instead of just go, 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 drop.
And the other flip of it too, they're going to call you on it. So I believe, because our dogs, especially, if we're too busy and we don't slow down for them, I'll probably have Clarence on my lap, our 100-pound puppy, and it's like, no, this is my time. Yeah, and it snaps you back to reality.
Yeah, and if you're out in the barns and you're just going through the motions with stuff because you're on your automatic pilot, there are times that they will on purpose get in your way. Like, hey, come back here, or slow down or whatever. And for me, it's the donkeys. If I am out there and I have not come to see them, and I just might I'm cleaning out the duck pond and they're cracking me up and I'm getting ready to head in and I didn't go say hi to them. And all of a sudden, all three of them, and make these. Oh, I got to be present. And they're saying, don't rush off. They're saying, don't forget what's important. And it's an absolutely wonderful reminder. And it makes us slow down and really be present.
Yeah. For me, it's a duck, the mule. Her name's Daisy, but the ones that work with her call her the mule because she has a mind of her own. And she's going to let you know. In the mornings, she's older, so she has a hard time walking. So when I go out, as soon as she hears me, It's wah, 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 wah. And people say, well, that's a spoiled duck because I go and I get her and she wants to go to the pond.
He doesn't mean he just opens the door. He means he picks her up and carries her and does the airplane thing with her. Wee! We're
Oh,
flying.
good.
Yeah, we didn't share that
Well,
much.
we wish we could do that with everybody. That's what they deserve.
But
Of course.
yeah.
Also,
so
Emily, this is why we invited both Beth and Dale on the podcast.
To get more truth, because we lie to ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a fiend.
And then when we get to the pond, you can feel her wanting to flap. So I lift up my thumbs and she starts flapping and I let her go. And Peking ducks don't fly. So that's her moment of peace. And
it's awesome to watch.
She goes head first into the pond, and it's very refreshing for me because, yes, I'm doing something for someone else, but it reminds me, you know what? It's the simple things that we keep forgetting to do.
And it's joy. She's pure joy. She comes up and she's like so happy.
Yeah, and then the other ducks follow because she's in the pond first. So I don't even have to go and walk them up to the pond. They just go. Oops, that's Clarence.
Hi, Clarence.
He's a big scaredy cat with a nice growl.
So anyway, he heard something, so I apologize for that. But even that, there's something wrong. So they're going to remind us, you know, and it's too many times we make ourselves like mechanical Mike and put ourselves on autopilot and we forget to feel.
We had therapy dogs that would come into the hospital when I was working as a chaplain before the pandemic started. I think since then they've maybe started to come back again. But I worked as a chaplain in a trauma 1 hospital, and so a level 1 trauma hospital. And so when they came in, like, I initially was like, oh yeah, they're coming in for the patients and the patients' families, and they are there for that. But the amount of impact they had on staff, especially when staff were just having a rough day, or when it had just been like trauma after trauma after trauma or something, and then like the dogs come by for petting and it's just like everybody melts. And
and it's interesting because one of the things you learn as a dog handler is the toll that takes on the dog, because they're there for pets. And there's a lot of times that they are giving love and they just can exude that rejuvenation for you. But there are times, and you can just tell that something different happened. Hazel can come home so exhausted. And other times she can come home so at peace that you really just have to know. You have to follow her cues because they do take it in. Like they feel your heart. Totally.
Yeah.
People don't realize even a horse, you could be 4 foot away. That horse can hear your heartbeat. Dogs are the same way. They can hear. They don't have to be there in the room. They may not hear the heartbeat, but they sense everything that's going around. Clarence has 2 saves at a facility because we were just walking past a room and he stopped. And the nurse asked what was going on. I said, I don't know. He's in training. I'm not sure what's going on. She went into the room, checked it out, and it was amazing. The ventilator failed to alarm out.
Oh, dear.
So when she went in, she found it, and he got a save under his belt. And they obviously replaced everything properly. And he could sense what was going on, that something was not right. Another person we went by, he again stopped, and they were having heart issues. So they were able to find out what was going on and give the patient the proper medicine so that they could, so it's amazing. We can learn so much. So
yeah. When Emily said that people melted in response to the dogs, I was reminded of, I have no idea where this verse is in the Bible, but we talked about it last year, and there's a bit where I think maybe in one of the poetry sections, maybe Isaiah or something, God speaks and the earth melts.
Yes.
And I heard it that particular time in a way that made me think of, what if instead of having the earth melt into molten lava, we were talking about the earth, melting the way when you see an adorable baby animal picture. Or yes, exactly. And I loved that image, and it stuck with me, and so that's what came to mind when Emily.
There you go. Yeah.
So you've talked about it some in terms of like the animals reminding you to stop. But how, in the midst of this, especially because you are a sanctuary, you are essentially on call 24/7 for these animals, how do you make sure that you get time for Sabbath and rest in the midst of the work of caring for the animals?
Well, to be honest and not lie to myself, we are making progress on that. Honestly, we have to remember and we have to carve out more time than we do. But I do think part of it is in perspective. Some of what we do isn't work the same way that healing people isn't work. I mean, it's it is and it isn't, or in the part of the scripture stuff you'll get to. But I think there have been moments that I'm tired and I realize that it's before, our open house and it's a Saturday. Or it's before I have to go talk to it's when I'm tired. It's what it feels like. I have to go talk to somebody about something that has to get done, and I get in the drudgery. And I do hear that, and I say, okay, clearly I need a break from this. But sometimes it's not really the work I need a break from, it's the reframing of it. Because that's my ego me, not my I am me. That's it's my brain doing that. And this work, I think one of the ways that even when it is 7 days a week, there are times in those days that we rest, and it's honoring those. And it is recognizing that sometimes we go out thinking we have to do a chore, and we come back in with having felt something sacred touching us. So if you let that in when it's happening, that is still, to me, Sabbath. That is still, I'm setting my burden down and I'm allowing something in.
Yeah.
I'm going to play with this a little bit. So, ha, 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 ha.
What a surprise.
My question is, I'm going to ask you a question. What is Sabbath? There you go.
That's the question, right? That's what we're wrestling with in the gospel, especially. So, and we did do an episode last year that we'll link to in the episode description on restoration, right? On that connection between rest and restoration. So yeah, now I'm curious, Pastor.
Because to me, the Sabbath, yes, it is rest. But to me, it's actually been something that I've been thinking about for a long time, especially this last couple of months, because we've been transitioning, we've been getting the farm ready and stuff. And to me, it is a rest. But to me, it's also more than that, because it's my time with God to where I recharge. Okay, so that's my definition. And I'm finding out that as long as I have my time with the mule, where I release her and stuff, when it settles me down enough, I go back to the basics. And when I mean basics, I mean even spending time in the morning to breathe properly, to be thankful, to make sure that my airways and the energies are going in the right direction, giving God my fears for that day, my concerns for that day.
Sure.
I really think that's the biggest part of the Sabbath. Give the things up that's holding you back from getting closer to God. So I think I'm doing it. Am I taking a day out? Oh no, I'm not going to lie about that. No, I got too many things. But I probably spend more time with God than I think I've ever done in my entire life, because I really believe this is where He wants us to be. And when we do that, then miracles happen. Not just working with others, but within our own lives.
Yeah, actually, I didn't tell you this. Last weekend, we had friends up for the weekend for the first time since COVID. And they have 2 teenagers that I've known since birth. And the older, Ellis, got up Sunday morning and she's like, okay, so what time do you guys leave to go to church? Because Dale was a pastor of a church for several years up here. And we've known them through their, christening and confirmations and everything. And we've had some great conversations with them over the year. And I'm like, oh, we're not really going to church a lot right now. And she was like, may I ask why not? I said, sure. I said, and she didn't know that you weren't a pastor anymore, of a church, I should say, that you weren't at charge. And I said, so he left the church last year, and we have been really focusing on this. And honestly, we really find that being out in the sanctuary, it literally is a sanctuary. Like when you take it to the religious meaning, we are entering sacred space. And that is a time, and I said exactly, that it is a time that you commune with God and talk with God and get recharged. And for me, it's a time of remembering. From Christianity, we would say the Holy Spirit in me. But it's a time to remember that energy that is innate in us. And so in that way, that's not that we don't want the fellowship and the community and the ability to worship and celebrate. Like, we're looking for a church around here. We just haven't found one that feels like home yet. But we don't have to go to a church on Sunday to get this feeling. That also includes community and all of the other reasons of fellowship for church for us. But I think it is because we have a very unique thing going on.
And here's the ironic thing. I'm not a pastor of a church anymore, but I probably believe this 100%. I don't push denomination. I don't push beliefs, but I do believe, because people have shared, that they feel more closer to God because of the things we do. So I brought more people to God doing this than I ever did behind a pulpit. And to me, that's incredible. That's being truly in harmony with, because, and that should be the master class right there. Are we in tune with the Lord? So, because to me, that is the Great Commission. You are being the ambassador He wants us to be. You are fulfilling a life that He wants us to fill.
Ooh, Pastor Dale's coming out now. He's on a roll. That's good.
Yeah.
We've talked about on this podcast, like there's, I think we did a deep dive, was it, Kay, into spirituality and organized religion or something like that.
As the sort of dichotomy, although of course it's a false binary.
Binary, of course. And we'll link to that episode in the episode description. But one of the things that I have heard like pushback against and experienced, right, is like when we say, oh, I can see God, like I can experience God in nature, there's a particular privilege a lot of the time that's associated with that, right? Where you don't have to be, like, in your life, you are not encountering the difficulties, right? Like, to experience God in nature is to experience God away from difficulties. And you all are doing the exact opposite, right? You are experiencing God through the animals in nature in a way that specifically like goes into those difficult places, which is like you were saying, right? Like that is what Jesus calls us to. Jesus calls us into those difficult places to find God there.
Okay, I have to share because I'm Carrie. No, this came up as I was thinking about this talk today. Last year, I was talking with someone, and we were just talking about how hard it is to have our day jobs and be doing this and care for the animals and building the business and needing time for ourselves and all of that. And yet, what's underneath all of it is that we are both people that are of being service to others. And we understand, and I learned this from a mentor of mine, God never puts two people together for the benefit of only one. You know, and so if I am helping, shame on me if I don't realize what I'm receiving, right? And I mean that from the ego place of it, but it's also what drains us is when we get in that false mindset of it, that it's a one-way street. And that's what I was talking about too, with when I'm feeling tired, how quickly I get reminded of the difficulties being what we are supposed to step into here, and that is actually what is honorable and honoring about it. It was just a couple of weeks ago, I opened the gate and somebody was here right at the very beginning, and this mom came out and she described, she was bringing her adult daughter who had two cardiac arrests on Mother's Day, and was not expected to live, and she did. And she has a lot of deficits at this point, both with cognition and memory and recall and attention span, and she's walking, but a little fragilely. And so the mom came up, and she's 30 something, but she looks much younger. And the dad was helping her out of the car, and mom just kind of, just in a nutshell, just gave it all to me. And she said, she worked for a vet, before this, and we just want her to connect to the animals again. In that moment, it just, how could you not crack wide open and just say, this is exactly why we are here. This is what we are meant to be here for. And maybe it's not rocket science, but maybe God's not rocket science. Right? And I turned around and I'm like, I was not tired. I was humbled. I was strengthened. I felt so powerful. I felt so blessed. I felt so empowered. And we want everybody on the planet to come see this place, because we know how people feel. But the difference is when they come and when they leave. And that's not us. It's not us that does that. And it's not even the animals. It's what happens when we're all together. And so I just had to share that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Beth made a great point. I think in many ways, don't get me wrong, I love studying the Bible. Can I quote it word for word? Absolutely not.
You did pretty good.
But can you apply it? Do you know how to apply it in a real world? And that's where people get tripped up.
Sure.
As we dive into our readings, our first reading for this episode is Isaiah chapter 58, verses 9b through 14. The prophet Isaiah reminds us that God is always with us. When we focus on helping those in need, we will be recognized for our work of restoration, and the Sabbath is God's gift to us, reminding us of our need to not focus solely on ourselves. So, one of the themes that came up for me in this was the idea of integrity. This is one of the times in Isaiah, right, where there's this, if you are doing the worshipy things that are like traditionally thought of as worship and not taking care of those who are oppressed among you, you're missing the point. And there's a lot of different ways that shows up in pop culture and stuff, but I love in the Divergent books when Triss's dad, he is like one of the characters that most embodies integrity, because he has chosen to be an abnegation, and abnegation is all about like service to the larger community and to others, and he really tries his best to do that in all aspects of his life. Like there are others in abnegation who have other really problematic situations, but like he really tries to do his best for his family, for his community, for the larger community, like at every level, which I think is really cool. I like the Divergent book.
I do too.
I do too. Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the very end, but the particular tropes.
What I love about this, right from the get-go, the last three words from, well, where he says, "Here I am."
Mm.
You know, I love that song. Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? You know, we need to, for me, we got to double check ourselves. I mean, the very next line it goes, "I remove the yoke from among you." You know, so when we're just standing by ourselves, what side of the fence are we going to stand on? Are we going to be with God, or are we going to be with the world? And that's really hard to do, because how many times do we go off and plan on being with God, but we cannot put the world down? We cannot separate ourselves from those, you know, oh, I got to get bills paid. Oh, I got to get this taken care of. Oh, the car broke down. I got to get this taken care of. So we get pulled back to the world things. And I'm not saying this isn't important, but if we're having a conversation like this here, you know, isn't it more fun when we're all engaged and looking at each other and having a good conversation? But if I turn around and say, yeah, that's important, and go this way, that's just rude, you know? And too many times I think we do that, and not intentionally. I think we've somehow got bred into things like that we don't even realize what we're doing. So, but yeah.
No, and Dale is very good at walking that. Obviously, I think we've already shared a lot of examples of how that shows up in the work that we do. And even when we're doing a fundraiser and we're doing other stuff, you know, we ask for a suggested donation. And yes, we need to raise some money because the animals, a lot happens to them. Mm-hmm. But when we're doing something and someone wants to be here and I see them put together $2 or $3 to give us, that means more to me than somebody that can, you know, throw out a certain dollar bill. And that's the integrity part. It's not a fact. It's not a black and white thing. It's what is of your heart and what are you showing up for? And that, I think, remembering those moments and holding that so that no matter what it is that we're doing it, it's not, I don't mean it intellectually that we're modeling it, but yeah, if you're not living it, you are missing the point. And it's easy to do. It's easy to get caught in your head. It's easy to get caught in the checklists and in the stuff to get done. But that's not really what helps me sleep better at night.
Yeah, I had a conversation with one of our supporters, and they said, well, you know, if you're going to do these tours, you need to do $40 per person per tour. And I turned around and I said, well, with what we made last year, why would I do 40? I mean, we wouldn't be getting all the people that we got, and we made twice that much, you know. So,
yep, sure.
Why not let God be in charge? You know, we're doing the right thing, and we know it. And there are days where we don't get as much, but that's not our goal here. Our goal is to support the people that come through the gates and do it the best way we can.
If you build it, they will come.
Yep. Hey, that should be a movie.
Hey, that's a great idea.
As we dive into our verses, in verse 10, we read, God says, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday. And this reminded me in Leverage Redemption, which Kay introduced me to. The way that Noah Wiley's character, I don't even remember the character's name, and I just know Noah Wiley from ER. But the way his character gets involved with this group of like criminals, basically like high stakes Robin Hoods, is by like trying to fix what he has done wrong. Like he worked for a company that did a lot of evil, and so he's trying to like undo that harm and make it better and satisfy the needs of those, not just of the afflicted, but of those he afflicted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's this like trying to navigate that in a way that like they actually tease out like this group is not just for you to like make your amends. Like you have to do some of that on your own too.
Oh yeah.
And also time is finite and you might not manage to make it. Yeah. And then when we get to verse 12, we read, God says, your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. And that word foundations in there reminded me of the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, which I found when I was a teenager. And it covers the slow decline and fall of a galactic empire and then the civilization that sort of rose from those ashes. And the central planet of the empire, Trantor, which at one point was just one gigantic city that not only covered the entire planet, but actually like dug into the planet itself and like into a decent chunk of the mantle. It wasn't quite like a city all the way through, but it was pretty close because they still had to have magma or else, the planet didn't spin, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a gigantic city. And as the empire fell, the city was slowly abandoned by more and more people because, of course, everything they had to get imported, and they just didn't have the resources to buy all that stuff anymore. And so more and more people left. And as time went on, the ones who stayed rebuilt Trantor into a totally new civilization by selling off all of the old stuff and especially the old metal that had been left behind. And so it turns out that rebuilding does not always mean making an exact copy of what used to exist, but instead was more about making use of what you had and becoming a fully realized civilization.
It's
again.
like the Pizza Hut building.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say about that.
Just because it used to be a Pizza Hut.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or people thought it was.
But that's what church is. Like, there are lots of church buildings that rebuilding is necessary, and it might not look like the same church building.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes that's a good thing, because some of those old church buildings were not accessible or pretty ugly. I've seen a few of those.
Or not useful.
Not helpful to the people who were there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then I'm going to swing this around a little bit. But, it's not just the buildings either, because it's ourselves. Growing up, I was very conscious about having dyslexia, being able to read in front of people and things. Mm-hmm. And I met this woman. She's really wonderful. And she, in the very beginning, she goes, you got to let that go. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of funny because when I did, just like this, it reshaped some of my thinking. And that doesn't define me anymore. And one of the cool things about it is when I start working with people that are very conscious of their own handicaps or their own limitations and stuff, I think that's one of the reasons why I said, let's just concentrate on the possibilities. Let's forget about the distractions. Let's forget about the obstacles. Let's just look over here. Let's stay over here. And when they realize that they can do it, again, it's amazing. So when I don't think I would ever have gotten that if I just let go of the things that have happened in the past, my own limitations, and allow people to see their possibilities. It's kind of cool anyway. Yeah.
It's also finding the things that you do well and that you enjoy and that you love, right? Like we all have limitations of some sort, and some of them are imposed by others and some of them are imposed by us, and there's frequently a combination. But like, I don't think that your horses care if you can read.
Yeah.
No.
Good point.
It's not the
many though. Many no, I'm just.
And I think clients care if the barn's clean or not. So yeah.
No, there's a lot of truth to that because by not letting go, we limit ourselves.
Our second reading for this episode is from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 18 through 29. The author speaks of God's unimaginable power by reminding us of the story of Moses on the mountain. God's power can shake apart any created thing, but the kingdom we are to inherit can never be shaken.
The theme that stuck out to me for this was celebration, which is not obvious from the description that came. But it is like the unimaginable power of God, right? But there's just this like sense for me of celebration. And I, as our listeners know, love the Great British Baking Show. Paul Hollywood's Handshake, I think, is overrated, but I love the show and the way that the show works as a cooking competition because everybody like wants to be the best and to do the best, but they want to be the best out of a group of people who are all doing their best, right? So they support each other, they help each other out, that sort of thing. And then the finale is like three people, the three finalists, and then they have this like big party and picnic where they like celebrate and like family and friends come and like people come back who have been on the show. But during the pandemic, they couldn't. And so they had all of the staff and all of the people that had been working on the show that were already in the pandemic bubble as the people celebrating. Sure. And so then they got to taste the food and they got to both celebrate and be celebrated, which is really cool.
Yeah.
In the second half of verse 24, we read about the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel, of Cain and Abel fame. And I was like, blood speaking? And then I was like, oh yes, vampires. Our listeners know I've just been diving into vampires. I finally finished Dracula on the way out to Pinecrest Lutheran Leadership Camp, shout out, where I am currently sitting while we record. But blood definitely speaks to vampires. Like, different blood is different speaking.
Sometimes more literally than others.
Also true. Also true.
That's right. The blood of life, literally, for vampires.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I read the first half of verse 28. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Okay, I'll be entirely honest. My first thought upon reading that was not terribly in-depth, but was simply, so I guess that means James Bond can't put it in a martini.
That's right.
Which, like, that is correct. You cannot put the kingdom of God into a martini. That probably is true on a number of levels. I'm not really an expert on martinis, but still.
Does that imply, though, that the kingdom can be stirred?
I think that's perfectly reasonable language.
Like you would stir up the reign of God.
Yes, absolutely. And since, the one thing that West Wing taught me about James Bond was that he's ordering a weak martini and being snooty about it because the shaking apparently breaks the ice.
Yep.
That does seem interesting, that you'd want to stir the martini of the kingdom or whatever, so that it doesn't break the ice and it remains nice and strong. Absolutely.
Nice and strong. There you go.
I was not expecting that to go anywhere near that direction, but okay, sure.
See,
you never know what tangents we will wander on to. Yes, exactly. What I eventually landed on for this verse was, it also reminds me that what we build can be shaken apart, but God's kingdom can't be. And that makes me think of the inevitable level or mission in a computer or video game, where the stuff that you're used to depending on by that point, because this is usually at least like halfway through, you've gotten used to how the game works. The stuff that you usually depend on, whether that's your equipment or your followers or your ability to access your magic or whatever, they take that away and they make you deal with just having everything else, but not that one thing that you had gotten used to depending on. And you're stuck with whatever's left or lying around. And it makes you play the whole game in a different way, and it reminds you of all the other stuff that you haven't been paying attention to. And lo and behold, the kingdom of God does something very much like that on a pretty regular basis, as we've discussed today.
Yeah. And I would say that's pretty much the work of therapy, too.
Yeah.
Breaking apart from all of these things that we have gathered as our skill set that are all just defenses. And what you're left with actually is something that is awesome and amazing. And if you want to go to the sacred, like our true nature, and we end up scared of it. Because when you said celebration, I'm like, what a nice way to frame that, because I definitely felt the awe part. And for me, it's when those things break apart. I loved your description, Kay. that you're really left with who you really are and how you're really connected. And sometimes when it's pure, it's like looking at fire. It's like looking at the sun. It's this thing that feels like it should be consuming, and yet you're okay. And that's the awesomeness of it. But man, if we could just figure out how to harness and turn it into a celebration, it'd be a lot easier to come, because it's very scary sometimes.
Yeah, gracious.
Wow.
Absolutely.
But that was a good image.
Our gospel reading for this episode is Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. After healing a woman, Jesus reminds those who criticize him for healing her on the Sabbath that even and especially on the Sabbath, we are called to the work of restoration. So, an obvious theme, which we've already touched on in the deep dive, is this idea of restoration. And I mean, it has come up in a couple different ways, because we also talked about it in buildings, right? But this idea is not like the Buffy episode that I just recently watched, because I'm watching through the Buffy episodes because vampires. Where she is restored from the dead, where she has sacrificed herself and died, and then she is restored by her friends. But it feels more like the restoring of the magic shop after any given episode of Buffy that takes place there, where monsters or vampires or whoever has come through and smashed things and made a mess, and then it's okay, it is time for restoration. It is time for bringing it back together, putting things in their places anew, and maybe in a new place, and seeing how that goes.
Yeah,
sure.
As we dive into the verses, in verse 11, we get the snippet, right? That just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. Now, far be it from me to want anybody to do anything straight, but that Pastor Barbara Lundblad, who is a pastor in a preaching professor, and then also a pastor in the ELCA, was preaching for a Proclaim gathering, which is a queer Lutheran rostered ministers group that I'm in, and she preached on this passage and talked about a friend of hers who had MS, multiple sclerosis, which is what my uncle had, and the ways that impacted her life and her perspective, because she could not, her view was literally different. And I think of also the donkeys that you were talking about, Beth, where the donkeys have one perspective. They don't look up and they don't look down, really. They that is their perspective, and that is how life is. I did a study abroad in Argentina when I was in college, and a lot of my life was out of control, and so my OCD got a little bit more extreme and to the point of being diagnosable while I was there. And at one point I just I have a balance thing, and so walking on sidewalks can be really hard and frustrating for me. And at one point I just took pictures of my feet, of the sidewalk, every time it changed to a new type of sidewalk, and then I made a photo album of a day in the life of my feet. And I think about that, of the things that there are things that we miss when we are so focused on looking at the ground. There are also things that we see that we otherwise would miss. And so that shift in perspective for me is I don't want someone who doesn't want to be bent over all the time to be bent over all the time. And also that person, this woman's perspective on life and on life, the universe, and everything, is one that is valuable.
It's so informed. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to be bent over all the time, but bending over now and then might be helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then in verse 15 we read, "But the Lord answered him and said, You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water?" And I had never really noticed this about this verse before, but I've been thinking for some time about all of my years of working with farmers and people who work with livestock, and I don't personally have a lot of direct experience with livestock. I grew up with cats. You don't tie up cats. That does not go well. But in all of my years of talking to and farmers and reading about farmers and livestock, I have never heard of having to tie an animal to a manger on the regular. Like maybe occasionally if there was something weird going on or if they were sick, but generally speaking, you don't have to tie them to the manger because they want to eat. They will go there. That is definitely on their list of things to do that day. And you'd really only have to do that, I think, if you had absolutely no fencing at all to keep them from wandering off, as animals sometimes do, especially apparently sheep. And that makes me think of God trying to corral us. And like, what would corralling humanity be like for God? And the image for me with like no fences, like literally, I mean, okay, I guess the top of the atmosphere of the earth is sort of a fence, but we're working on passing that. I was thinking of the novel Ender's Game because the movie totally does not exist. There is no movie. And it's about training young children to basically grow up to be generals, which like ethically gray, very complicated, but they do this by using a room without gravity where the kids like bump around as though they're spaceships and try to like learn tactics and strategy that way. And it's sort of a very complicated game of tag and in this gravity free room, and like trying to corral like especially the youngest kids that show up, because like the youngest kids that come to the school are like 6, trying to corral them in that room. Like they have specialists who deal with the 6-year-olds because you need a very particular set of skills in order to have any kind of order in that room. And I have to imagine that must be what it, at least something like what it's like for God.
Yeah, I always think of a big litter of kittens.
Yeah.
Open the door, good luck.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things I always thought about with this stuff is you're right. I apologize. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. And that simulation, it was based off that simulation that you were talking about, being the non-gravity and stuff. And here we are. We want to be tethered to something. And God doesn't want us to be tethered to nothing but Him. And we don't realize that just how powerful that is. It's kind of ironic because this chair I sit in is hard. This table we're talking from is hard and it doesn't move, and that's comforting for us in some ways. But God is always moving, and I don't know if I can handle that. But yet, when we do, when we see it, that's actually a stronger bond than any table, any chair, any form that we could build on this earth. It takes a lot of doing.
Yeah.
So
now it is time for our newest segment, which we should probably stop calling it that at some point because we've been doing this for a few months. But it's time for Let's Make a Muppets Musical, where we talk about the passages that we've just read and who of the Muppets would we cast, and would we throw in the occasional token human for these stories.
Dale, you're up.
Yeah, I think Dale has to go first.
Oh my gosh. Hi ho, Kermit the Frog here. Gotta use him. He's the innocent. He's always the innocent. So
Sure.
So who would he be?
Yeah, who would Kermit the Frog be, dear?
Would he be bent over?
He's not very turtle.
Maybe he could be the woman. I mean, because
he could.
Yeah, he straightens up and walks away.
We tend to be gender blind in our casting.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, you kind of have to be colorblind with the Muppets because there aren't a lot of green people. I was looking at our passage with the idea of the world shaking, and it has been a little while since I have seen the original Muppet Show from back in the day when they would actually like do the thing of producing a variety show concept. But I do remember at least a few times when we would go from a regular scene in that and then like zoom in on something very tiny happening in one spot that was, happening with tiny little mini Muppets or something like that, exploring the mice in the walls, that kind of thing. And I was imagining, if anyone was going to shake the world of those tiny little mini Muppets, I think it would have to be Animal. Now, whether or not that's like on his drum set or not, I don't know. But like, I think he could probably do that in several different situations. If we're going to look for someone to shake God's kingdom, or at least try to, I think Animal can probably try to pull that off.
That seems fair for me.
Yeah.
Did you have one, Beth?
Well, I actually thought of Animal too, but a little differently. It was about that whole celebration and awe thing. Because if anybody can see that no matter how much power and energy you have, it cannot be shaken, that would be Animal, right? And the original Muppet movie, when he puts to be 25 million feet tall and he just comes out, but he's saving the day. That's awe. I don't know why, but I just thought of animal.
Yes, I love that.
Mhm.
That's perfect.
That is fantastic. Yeah. I was thinking about Kermit as the bent over woman, Dale, and I think I would cast Miss Piggy as Jesus. Right, because
Yeah.
we're like mad
There
at
you
Miss
go.
Piggy
Yeah.
for healing Kermit on the
Yeah.
Sabbath.
Yeah.
And she absolutely would.
She would not take
Yeah.
any of that grief.
No,
She'd be like,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, now I actually want to see that scene. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, bonus round.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with what we talked about. Swedish Chef, where would he plug in?
The Swedish Chef is actually one of the most frequently mentioned Muppets on our show.
Oh yeah.
And he
There's
does
so
seem to
much
always
food.
pop up.
There's so much food in there.
I mean, you have to have food after worship, right? Like, presumably the Swedish Chef has snuck out partway through the worship service to go make sure that the coffee and the snacks are ready. Because he is Swedish, right?
Okay, so it would either be the Swedish Chef or it would be Beaker that would be Martha in the Mary and Martha thing. Because Beaker's
Actually, we did just do that passage not too long ago.
I don't
yeah.
remember who we
Beaker or the
cast,
Swedish
though.
Chef. That'd
There
be
you go.
curious. Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think we did say that the Swedish Chef was in the kitchen helping Martha out.
Yeah.
And I don't remember who we cast as Martha, but
Yeah.
because Martha wasn't just cooking, like there was more going on. So Martha was busy, but the Swedish Chef was helping.
An apprentice.
There you go.
Mhm. Well, and if we're going to have a crowd saying mean things, I think we need the hecklers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
they-
Statler and
they could be
Waldorf will need to show up.
Yeah.
They could be the judgmental people.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Always listening.
I heard that somewhere.
So, Beth, any other thoughts on life, the universe, and everything?
I do have one last thing.
Yes.
And it popped up a couple times as we were talking. It is about the notion that it is about connecting and being present and conscious, but realizing that we're bigger than just our individual selves, right? And so I recently took a course, and in the middle of it is kind of sciencey. This guy was talking about how do we remember our true nature and our true spirit when we get so caught up in our individual little egos. And he said, remember, each individual water molecule is not wet. The experience of wetness emerges when water molecules connect together. And I just had to say, wow. So I wanted to share that.
Cool.
Isn't that awesome? Wetness emerges with connection.
Yeah. Well, and water is never wet, really. It is the things that water touches that get wet.
That get wet. Exactly.
Ah.
I like that.
So think on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and like my pastor brain is like, okay, baptism. Whenever you mention water, you got to think about baptism and what does that mean? And
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Whether you dunk or sprinkle.
Yes. Any kind. Dale, any other thoughts on life, the universe, and everything?
The book, the Bible. Just don't read it. Play with it and go out and do things, man. Look at the possibilities. So,
Absolutely.
this is another thing that really helps. As my family knows, I skydived before, jumped out of a plane and stuff. And the coolest thing about this is, seriously, and there's other ways to do it. You don't have to jump out of a plane to get this feeling.
Thank goodness.
But it works for me, so that's all that mattered. It was so much fun because I was nervous until my tail left the plane. When I was physically out of the plane, even though I was coming down over 120 miles an hour, fear was gone. And during that time that I was falling and before the chute opened up, I was able to see a world full of bright colors. I could see birds flying underneath me. I could see all the things that God asked me and wanted me to see. But I'll never forget that moment because it wasn't until I let all my fears go that I could see things as for what they are. Beautiful. Anyway, that's it. So
thank you. And thank you both so much for joining us.
Well,
we are so glad to have had you with us.
This was so much fun.
Let's do it again sometime.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I promise I'll behave more. No.
You'll behave exactly the same amount. Yes.
As we want.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us. Catch us next time when we'll discuss nerdery connections to the scripture readings for the 12th Sunday after Pentecost. This podcast has been produced by us, Kay Roloff and Emily Ewing. For more fun, check us out on Twitter and Facebook at Nerds at Church, or contact us at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com.
Also, if you like what you've heard, rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever you catch your podcasts. If you want access to our uncut guest episodes and interviews, live Q&As, and more, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. It's, I'm sure, cheaper than feeding any of the animals for a week or a month.
Absolutely. And let us know on Facebook or Twitter who you would cast for Let's Make a Muppets Musical for this episode.
As the ancient Christian said,
Pax
Vobiscum.
Vobiscum.